A biome map of Serina 15 million years post-establishment, showing tectonic changes since the Hypostacene, among them the separation of Ankiska and Striata, and the full fusion of Striata southwards with Walteria, which has nearly closed off a large inland ocean, as the supercontinent of Cirrus breaks into two distinct landmasses for the first time. And Kiska itself also begins to pull apart, with its north moving eastward and its south southwards towards Devlandia, widening a thin land bridge. It is now 15 million years since Serina's establishment, and the Hypostacene is over. In the last few million years, Serina has entered into a new climactic condition, with the moon gradually exhibiting a worldwide trend towards cooling and the spread of aridity. Within 5 million years of Serina's abandonment, once life had been allowed to establish itself firmly to its new ecology, initially mild and tropical conditions had already begun to dissolve, unsustainable without artificial maintenance. Instead, the world of Serina began to revert towards the drier grassland world its geography naturally would sustain best. With the gradual decrease in precipitation over much of the moon, bamboo forests, which spread from pole to pole within only a few million years of establishment, began to retreat to a smaller number of remaining isolated regions still moist enough to support their rapid and lush growth, as hardier prairie grasses, sunflowers, and dandelion derivatives reclaimed much of their former range. Less reliant on high precipitation, these plants can store large quantities of water and nutrients in underground roots and tubers, and guard it from hungry animals with spines and unpalatable tissues. Where rainfall is too low for bamboo to grow, but higher than on the open grasslands, sunflower barrens transform into the beginnings of a new sustainable woodland type, as suddenly as other floral groups develop tolerance to the toxic tannins they produce and evolve to compete beside them. Beginning 11 million years post-establishment, Serina has entered the Tempucenic era. Characterized by a gradual shift of the Serinian world from tropical to temperate, it will bring Serina's first ice age, as seasonal ecosystems will begin to outnumber tropical, the latter of which will soon be confined solely to a thin but rich ring along the equator, as the polar regions of Serina begins to experience snowfall for the first time. Only a taste of what is now to come. At the era's height, Serina will develop its first permanently frozen polar ice caps, which will not melt again for tens of millions of years. Serina will not become a snowball world, however, any more than our own world is today. Winter will still give way to spring, and spring to summer. A seasonal rotation on a tilted axis means Serina experiences its seasons not unlike our own. There will always be balance, and life, now well established, will go on. Migration becomes widespread, as animals are forced away from comfortable home ranges with increasing changes in their environments as winter and summer grow increasingly different. Faced with these same challenges, Serina's flora begin their most noticeable evolution yet, beginning to take on appearances increasingly unlike their ancestors and grow in new, innovative ways, carving their own path up the tree of life silently, often overshadowed, but not stopped, by the lively activities of the insects and animals around them. As desertification spreads, it is the towering, tree-like sunflowers that slowly become Serina's equivalents to the cacti and other hardy succulents of Earth, reducing their foliage to only a seasonal flush, eventually for some to lose it altogether in favor of swollen and spiny trunks with only their vibrant golden blossoms to ever belay their ancient ancestry as a common garden plant and roadside weed. But other plants will soon rise again to compete. Remaining equatorial and patchy temperate forest is still dominated by bamboo, which now lies overshadowed by more drought-tolerant flora in most of the rest of the world. In millennia to come, however, it will experience a resurgence, as the Tempucene and the changes it has brought will be the foundation, thanks to some little helpers, for the next major innovation in the plant kingdom, which will put them one day again on par to, and perhaps even beyond, their hardier foresting counterparts. Conditions will no longer be universally paradisiacal and pristine in a changing world, but change brings adaptation. Change is the only thing, anywhere, at any time, that always stays the same. As it always has, life goes on. And as it goes on, it becomes ever more distinct, unique, and diverse. 5 million years is not a long time on a geologic timescale. It is, however, enough to have brought some significant innovations to Serina's ecology. Within this span have occurred numerous large evolutionary innovations not quite reached just 5 million years ago. Entire new forests now grow across Ankiska and the north of Striata. No longer unnatural monocroppings, the sunflower barrens. These have instead given way to diverse forests of false trees, composed in fact of large, perennial sunflowers, which have since traded their annual growth habit to stand the year round on insulated, above-ground trunks, providing a source of food and shelter to many animals the year round. Grasses begin to diversify noticeably in the Tempucene, as initial explosions of adaptable primitive plants die back and are replaced by, or themselves adapt into, forms adapted specifically to the conditions on Serina. Bamboo, pushed to rarer wet environments by a drying climate, still absolutely monopolize anywhere wet enough to support them, from pole to equator. Thanks in part to an increasingly mutualistic relationship many species have begun to develop, with a number of species of small leafcutter ants, which evolve to live almost their entire lives based within the warmth and safety of their hollow stalks. Aided by the shelter that nests within the bamboo provided from cold, rain, and predators, the insects have begun in the Tempucene to spread back northwards and south. Protected by nests inside these hard, woody stalks, they can hibernate long winters away without much worry of being eaten by hungry birds. Initially existing as a parasite to the bamboo trees, they live within them as long as they can before they've eaten away too much of a cane's foliage for it to survive, and the cane dies, and takes with it the colony. By now, however, some species have ceased to feed upon their host plants or host species, allowing it to grow for longer and prolonging their own lifespans. In return, some bamboo begin now to evolve specially designed hollow knots at their joints to accommodate the insects, which now serve to guard them from the onslaught of other ant colonies which try to feed on them. It becomes advantageous for bamboo clumps to attract and hold onto their own resident ant populations, for if claimed by one as home, it will not be eaten by another as supper. Many leafcutter ants evolve new warrior castes, similar to those normally only seen in predatory ants, which serve only to guard host trees from the hungers of neighboring ant colonies, while foragers, similar to the ancestral ants, go out to feed on their neighbors' home groves and braving their own warriors, unaware of the irony in the whole situation. It is the bamboo which are the true winners no matter what, however. All guarded by their own armies, they are individually all eaten considerably less frequently and in lesser quantity than otherwise they would be without the ants' border wars. Though the ants must consume the same amount of food no matter what, they no longer decimate single groves to death, instead taking only small and sustainable quantities from each plant. The northern drylands comprise the largest temperate desert region in the world at this stage, covering an area more than 3 times the size of California. 250 miles north from the extreme northern edge of the floodplains, they lie at higher elevation and support an entirely different ecosystem. Rain is infrequent here towards the center of the continent, with most falling towards the coasts before ever reaching the region, which grows increasingly desert the further one goes towards the center of the landmass. North Ankiska is a varied continent so far as biomes, progressing from the sprawling wetlands of the central floodplains to widespread tropical forest in the south, temperate savanna to woodland up through tundra in the north, and hot desert in its interior. In addition, of course, to a variety of border habitats in between. It is one of these border habitats we will visit today, intermediate between the sunflower woodlands of southwest Ankiska and the dry desert interior. Crop up innumerable small, patchy savannas. Though trees grow sparser and smaller the further inland one goes from this point, they continue to occur, albeit in lessening quantities, nearly to the center of the desert, tapping into groundwater, invisible from the surface, and providing a small lifeline that allows complex life to survive even into the extreme depths of the region's hottest heartland. Now here we see a male Robbie's red-breasted ground serin, Terraserinus roberti, a lovely little bird native to the Ankiskan drylands and nowhere else. It is an omnivorous, basal species with a range covering only a few hundred miles in any direction. But within this range, it is enormously abundant, and it must surely number in the millions, running about the ground, flapping its little undersized wings as it goes. It's cute, sure, but it's only a few ounces in weight. A tubby and poor-flying species from the same early wave of derivation, which by now has mostly died out on the planet, eaten out of existence. Yet this creature persists. It can barely fly and almost never does, and it feeds entirely upon the soil, on insect larvae and large, ripe grass seeds. It lives in an environment surrounded by predators, frequently with no significant cover in which to hide. And beyond its heavy bill, it has virtually no defenses of its own against their attacks. How does it survive? To figure this out, we must delve further into its environment. Aha! Here it is. Look how lovely it is. Early spring in the drylands. Grass is still relatively abundant in this outlying region, including several species of thick-leafed and stocky species, which on close inspection far more resemble aloes or yuccas. Alongside miserable, thorny dandelion shrubs, these unusual forms grow low to the ground, sending up colorful, nectar-filled flower stalks, even more atypical for their family than their leaves. These are an unusual new offshoot of the grass family which, as a result of Serina's ecological vacuum, are beginning to trade their ancestral wind pollination for an insect-driven route, converging closely on showier plants for the same reasons, to attract insects to spread their pollen. These new oddball grasses even fruit, producing succulent, fleshy covering upon their seeds for the purpose of feeding birds in the hopes that their actual seeds, hard and fibrous, pass through the stomachs untouched and manage to sprout. A real problem for other grasses with such large numbers of seed-eating birds around, to the point where for many others, it is given few seeds will ever survive, with asexual reproduction through runners and offshoots providing the main means of reproduction. Still not far from the dense forests, sunflower trees, many still in winter dormancy, while one early riser has just begun to blossom, still dot the landscape with relative regularity here. Large and weeping, they exist as a strange chimera of plants, resembling trees when in leaf, cacti when in dormancy, and yet when in bloom, showing large yellow flowers effectively unchanged from their ancestors. They are a flower with an identity crisis. Once they all come fully into leaf, they will provide some degree of welcome shade to grazers, such as the large and lithe cursorial ardgoose derivative, which has left the wetlands for the upland savanna. She is now carried by long, strong legs and exhibits a bill much better adapted for grazing, with sharp ridges along its length, ideal for handling coarse grass. The first of Serina's birds to come to this innovation. She belongs to a new radiation of the ardgoose line, which has spread across Ankiska, which are adapted to the open grasslands and the food they provide. But she is not alone in this environment, and there is a reason she must now run. Predators have arrived. Though at almost 200 pounds in weight, she worries little from the kestrel-like aerial hunters that are the falconaries, fully fledged and capable bird hunting specialist predators shot off from the shrieker line, now a bane to songbirds everywhere. She has other worries. An aberrant offshoot of the formerly herbivorous axebills of 5 million years ago has evolved into the much larger and much more fearsome lineage of predators known as skikes. Opportunistic omnivores with sharp bills equally suited to rooting in the soil or killing small prey, such as the now near precocial, already feathered newborn nestlings and eggs of our poor mother ardgoose, which, hatching at a far more mature stage than their ancestors, would have been able to run after their mother in only 3 days. Though they could not keep speed with an adult plains ardgoose, the skikes become one of the earliest megafaunal carnivores in a young Serina. Womblers, those awkward, overinflated remnants of an early predator-free Serina, will decline markedly following the evolution of these large predators, and will before long vanish entirely, leaving no descendants. But below the feet of them all, an enormous lobster-like arthropod shovels soil, expanding its home in search of nutritious roots and tubers out of reach to surface dwellers. This huge creature, which weighs as much as a small kitten, up to 2 pounds, is, in fact, a cricket, and by Sarinan standards, it is only a medium-sized specimen. With the absence of competition, crickets exploded into subterranean niches very quickly after their introduction to the planet, and unlike many other initially adaptable invertebrates, they've kept their dominion over the underworld even now. However, this particular cricket isn't by himself in this burrow chamber. Around him, a number of little birds scuttle and scurry, safe within his subterranean tunnels from the dangers of the surface world. They are ground serins, not unlike our fellow above, and while they could never dig out such a nice home for themselves, by making use of their benevolent neighbor's house, they have provided shelter unavailable to any other birds. This is their secret to survival. Why, however, is this neighbor so benevolent? Why should a large burrowing cricket, who has done all of this work to clear out this underground burrow system by itself, tolerate a flock of interlopers setting up house alongside it? It is larger than the serins and could easily trap one against a burrow wall and kill and consume it if it wished. Yet it allows them to brush right alongside it without aggression, and it steps lightly over even nutritious nests of eggs, which they lay and incubate deep within the burrow system without so much as licking its chops. This is because here in the drylands, a marvelous example of symbiosis has evolved between the cricket and the finch. The cricket may seem to wear the pants in the relationship, with strength and power, but it is notoriously nearsighted. When it must come to the surface to push soil from its den, or to feed when the rains bring nutritious greens to the desert, it could easily be caught and eaten up by some keen-eyed bird waiting just outside. It is so that by allowing a small, non-threatening species of bird to share its home in close quarters, the cricket is provided a highly effective warning system to safeguard itself against attack, in return for allowing the smaller bird a place of residence. As the birds forage for food outside the burrow's edge, they are extremely alert and wary to the slightest danger. If the cricket sees the birds outside foraging, it can be certain that danger is not about, and that it, too, can come into the light and feed in safety. If the finch spots danger, it lets out a piercing alarm call and makes a mad dash to the burrow, a call which the cricket, too, will heed and follow suit, even if it sees no danger itself. When outside the burrow, the cricket never strays further than its comrades, maintaining a position at all times between them and the burrow, and frequently keeping physical contact with one of its compatriots at all times, quickly running for cover if it loses this lifeline of safety, at which point a bird will often return to the burrow and lead the cricket back out. In return for the bird's advance notice 15 million years post-establishment, most of Serina is beginning to experience a cooling, drying climactic trend. Environmental conditions are becoming a little harsher and less stable, and life must adapt to these changes. The poles see snow for the first time. Droughts become seasonal norms on the plains. Large, carnivorous birds have begun to evolve, hunting their relatives on land and in air. The peaceful beginning of the world of birds has come and gone. Yet this is not true for everywhere. Islands on Serina, as on Earth, are subject to different selective pressures than mainland ecosystems. Serina's isolated Kieran Islands, situated along its equator in the middle of its widest ocean, suffer no want for water or warmth. They have changed virtually not at all since the moon was colonized, and remains exceedingly suitable for plant and animal life. Tropical rainforest climate prevails throughout the center of these islands, with warm savannas to the north and productive temperate grasslands in the south. Plants thrive here. Grasses have grown to tall heights in response to the high moisture levels. And though true bamboo is absent on these islands, meadow grasses have begun evolving thick stalks to attain a similar form. These tall reeds begin to form dense, thick forests as high as 30 feet tall in the wet interior, while along the coasts, clovers take on tree-like forms with woody trunks and branching stems. To set seed, most flowering plants on the Kierans rely primarily upon the strong ocean winds in the absence of many pollinating insects, and few have yet evolved fruits. The Kieran Islands now supports dozens of endemic bird species, and some of the largest of all birds alive so far. All over early Serina, as happens on any Earth environment lacking predators, birds quickly lost their powers of flight and became terrestrial, often very large, in the Hypostacene. Gigantic, helpless birds, such as warblers, evolved rapidly to enormity, but most have since died out, as effective predators evolved to feed on them. Yet here on the Kierans, similar bird groups continue to survive as a result of the continued absence of large carnivores on their isolated habitat. Rather than go extinct, the flightless canaries of the Kierans have now had time to grow even larger than the warblers. A family of humongous canaries called chub birds, found nowhere else in the world, still thrives upon this isolated island where no large land predator has yet evolved to hunt them, in the vein of the flesh-eating skikes and their relatives on the mainland continents. Growing to weights of 900 pounds and heights of 10 feet, these huge finches are not closely related to similar birds of the Enkiskan floodplains or elsewhere. Their ancestors landed on these islands and evolved along similar lines independently as a result of similar environmental pressures. Their wings, like the warblers were, are now completely useless stumps, while their legs are immensely strong and powerful, to carry their weight. Their bodies are round and obese, and also like the womblers, they stand with a tall stance, at times almost resembling huge bowling pins, with their sturdy legs set far back. They move slowly, incapable of running because they have no need to hurry. Nothing on the islands even comes close to big enough to bother them. Above, a male and female of one of the largest chub-bird species forage along a beach. The male is still more colorful than the female and has evolved a vibrant throat pouch used in display. But as courtship is very reduced in these birds, males have lost the ability to sing. The chub-birds are herbivores, feeding on a diet of leaves and shoots, as well as the large nuts produced by the tree clovers that thrive along the sandy shores of the islands, with which they have entered an evolutionary arms race. The tree grows ever bigger seeds to dissuade the bird from eating them, while the bird grows an ever taller reach and stronger crushing bill to access them anyways. They are peaceful, have abandoned all territoriality as a result of the abundant resources, and live carefree lives on the islands. Males have even lost the ability to sing, as they do not need it to attract mates, which are always around, or to defend a territory. Nothing on these islands even approaches their size, and these adults have no threats, so they live a very long time, perhaps 75 years or more if they can avoid accident or illness. It seems a perfect life for the chub bird. But look closer, and there is something strange going on here. Despite having no enemies as adults, being much larger than any of the few flying bird predators, and with none on the ground to speak of, and living many decades, the Kirin Islands are not overrun by chub birds. Rather, the bird's population is low and widely distributed, to the point where there is always far more food than is ever consumed by the population. This seeming disparity can only be understood if we leave the sunny seashore and delve into the thickets of the forest a mile or so inland, where hidden from sight in the tangled vegetation, an ecological relationship equal parts extraordinary and horrific has evolved, with no equivalent on Earth or anywhere else upon the world of birds. It is within these shadowy, lushly vegetated interior forests that the chub birds, normally spending their lives near the beach, go to lay their eggs and raise their chicks. Here in the thickets, their young will be sheltered from the beating sun and sometimes harsh oceanic storms. Mothers do most of the parenting here and nest in large colonies. Though the islands are large, all of the females cluster their nests in close confines, just 1 or 2 body widths apart, as if they are trying to find safety in numbers. But from what? The only vaguely threatening predator birds to the nestlings on the island are seabirds and small falconaries, and neither enters the grass forest, where the close-set stems prevent even the most agile flyer's entry. What, if any threat, are they trying to avoid is not apparent as the oversized canaries begin to nest. The male chub-birds never leave the beaches. Their parental instincts have long atrophied. They live to breed and spend their days dancing around and displaying their brightly colored throat pouches to any female that looks their way. After mating, they take no more part in the process. The female, meanwhile, lays 10 or more very large eggs in a scrape in the dirt and incubates them on her own for about a month. The eggs, just like the adult, are too large and well defended for any animal on the island to consume. When her chicks hatch, however, they are very small relative to their mother, though still quite immense for a nestling of any bird, weighing 10 to 12 pounds, about as much as an average adult cat. They resemble almost exactly the chicks of a normal little canary, entirely bald, pink, and defenseless, with their eyes and ears sealed. They are extremely altricial, and all they know how to do at hatching is raise their mouths up to be fed by their mother. For several days she does not leave them, covering them entirely beneath her body and keeping them safe and warm. She regurgitates a fat-rich fluid produced upon specialized cells in her crop, a sort of milk she synthesizes from the rich nuts she feeds herself upon, and feeds the young with this almost every hour for as long as 7 days without getting off the nest. During this first week, the young grow as much as 3 times their weight, and their eyes begin to open. The first signs of feather quills are just breaking through the pink skin when the female, now famished and down as much as 150 pounds from their starting weight, must leave the young chicks alone for the first time since their hatching, and return to the shore and feed herself. And it is now that the chicks are in grave danger. Within just a few minutes of a mother chub-bird's departure, skulking scavengers appear in the shadows around the nest. They have been waiting all along for this moment. Clicking, clacking creatures amble slowly, laboriously out of the reeds. Beady black eyes stare ahead, eyeing the defenseless chicks, and the creatures slink closer on long, pointed legs. Alien creatures with armored bodies and huge, crushing claws come closer and extend long, bristle-like antennae toward the nestlings and brush them over the chicks, causing them to huddle tighter together and hunker low to the ground. Sensing the coast is clear and the parent is away, hordes of huge, terrestrial hermit crabs begin climbing into the nest. Each chick's only defense is to struggle toward the center of the nest and shelter within its siblings. But each chick struggles to get to the middle, so none manage to hide for long. At first, the crabs grab at all of them, pulling their legs, searching out the weakest links. The stronger chicks squirm away, and may manage to make enough noise that the crabs will release them. Eventually, however, enough crabs have arrived that they can overpower one of the nestlings, at first picking on the smallest and most vulnerable. Once blood is drawn, the crabs become frenzied. They congregate on the bleeding chick, and then, working up from the hind legs, onto the flanks, into the body cavity, and toward the head, they quickly overwhelm and devour it, leaving nothing but bones in mere hours. Large hermit crabs live on the Kirin Islands, some as big around as basketballs. When mother chubbirds leave their chicks alone, they gather in swarms to feed on the unprotected chicks. Each time the mother leaves to feed, she returns to fewer survivors. There are many nesting chubbirds in the colony, and the females all leave and return at different times of the day. Each only leaves for a few hours, and once the mother returns, the predatory crustaceans make a retreat. She will stomp and kill them if she finds any lingering in the nest. But every few days, and more frequently as the young grow, the mother bird must leave her young alone to forage. Every time she does, she leaves behind fewer, larger chicks. The crabs grow bolder as the chicks get bigger, mobbing them in larger and larger groups. The fatality rate is extreme, and over 85% of the chicks across the colony die in their first 3 weeks, until the survivors are so large that the crabs simply cannot kill them outright. Yet the few young chubbirds that survive this first onslaught may be even less fortunate than their siblings, because it will not be for almost 9 weeks that the chubbird is able to walk away and escape from the threats. It has never evolved precociality. Instead, the chubbird has evolved into a strange and violent arms race with the island's only significant predators, hermit crabs, and has responded to their predation by growing much, much larger instead of more agile. It retains the growth pattern of a tiny songbird rather than a terrestrial game bird, and has gotten caught up in a feedback loop where the only effective defense that it can evolve is to simply grow even larger to make the crab's attacks a little less damaging, rather than evolve the suite of adaptations necessary to run from its enemies, which would take longer to evolve. Yet the bigger it evolves to grow, the more trapped it becomes in this arms race. Long before it can eventually stand and fend for itself, at almost half of its final adult size, the chubbird chick has become a huge, entirely helpless ball of fat and feathers, which can do little more than scoot itself along the ground and wait for its parent to feed it. A 300-pound, but still utterly defenseless nestling. And though the chick at this age is too large for the hermit crabs to kill, they do not stop coming for it. Each time the mother leaves it unattended, they graze it, taking flesh from its backside and quite literally eating it alive. Chicks that grow for several weeks and survive the initial onslaught are not free of crab predation yet. Though now too large to be killed and eaten outright, they are so defenseless that the crabs continue to pick at them and graze on their flesh while they are still alive. The larger a chick can grow, the less damaging the constant nibbling by hermit crabs becomes. So there is a strong selection for only the largest chub birds to survive. This is at the expense of their ability to evolve any alternative and more effective manners of avoiding predation. However, such as being unable to run away from danger at an earlier age. Indeed, the larger the chick grows, the longer it is vulnerable to crab attacks. Unable to escape its fate, and eventually growing apathetic as it is slowly picked apart in little bites day after day. A worse hell is harder to imagine in the human mind than the childhood of the chub bird. But eventually, a very lucky few do escape it. The bigger it gets, the better a chick can defend itself, turning to peck the crabs away. And in the final few weeks of its childhood, it will eventually be left alone. But the damage will have already been done. Only one in a few hundred chicks in a colony survives to fledging, to the point they can walk away from the nest and join the adults at the coast. Yet those which were not killed when small do often succumb to shock and infection as they are picked apart alive before reaching this milestone. And the very few which survive to adulthood are often permanently scarred and leave the nest site bloodied, often missing toes and wings. Once they are finally able to walk away from danger, the crabs are no real threat to these juveniles, and their scars heal and are mostly covered by their plumage. They attain the peaceful and carefree life of their elders, a reprieve they have more than earned. Predation by hermit crabs is, in fact, the only limiting factor in the chubbird population. Chubbirds live at population densities typical of a cave strategist, and would be expected to produce just a few offspring at a time to compensate for their very long lifespans. Yet these giant birds are actually extreme R specialists. They produce many, many more offspring than will survive to maturity. The large clutches laid by the chub bird are many more than she could ever raise were all to survive to maturity, and so the majority of the nest is sacrificial. She produces 10 chicks with the hopes that the one she can physically rear to adulthood will survive, and the rest will be eaten by the island's land crabs. The parent bird's long lifespan is a secondary adaptation to compensate for extreme nestling mortality. Long lifespans mean more breeding opportunities. Many years, if not most, all of the chicks in a brood might be lost to predation. And in years where even the single huge chick she can raise to maturity survives, the toll it takes on the female to raise it means she can only nest every second or third year. The chubbird is a bird which has evolved a system of reproduction more akin to a mussel or even an oak tree than any extant bird. Adults of the species, if they can grow up, can live a very long time with relatively few threats. But the overwhelming majority of young die early in life, so that huge numbers of young are produced to compensate in order for even one to reach maturity. It is possible that if the male chub bird still helped to parent, that juvenile survival would be higher. The fact that the male takes no part suggests that the crab predation on young chicks to this high extent is relatively recent and did not occur millions of years ago before the males lost their parental instincts. It also leaves open the possibility that males could become more involved again. Unfortunately, even if this does reoccur, it will still not keep the chubburbs dominant on the Kurans for long, because the environment is changing. Just as crabs were not always the dominant predator, neither will they be so forever. As more efficient avian predators eventually evolve on these islands, as they have already on the continents, the crabs will be displaced, and the chubburbs will eventually find themselves trapped in specialization the same way the womblers were. Hugely oversized altricial chicks might be better able to survive bites from land crabs, but they will not be able to outgrow larger avian predators. The chubbird will not remain the dominant herbivores upon the Kurans. As the Tempucenic era progresses, Serina continues to cool. By 25 million years post-establishment, the Moon's polar regions have developed the first of their permanent ice caps, and tundra has spread across the poles. The planet is largely a savanna world, with widespread grasslands covering the middles of every major landmass. Dense bamboo forest thrives on wet coasts and on the rainy sides of mountains and in isolated pockets worldwide, while sunflower forests radiate widely across all of the world's continents. Serine ecosystems throughout the Tempucenic are well established and diverse. The canaries have diversified into more than 20,000 distinct species, covering virtually the whole range of earthly avian morphology and countless forms like the Earth has never before seen. From the smallest seed eater to the largest terrestrial predator, thriving in the driest deserts, the coldest tundras, the wettest of jungles, and even thousands of miles out at sea, the canaries continue to rule their home world. Aardgeese. One of the most competitive orders to evolve upon Serina so far, which have radiated enormously by the Middle Tempucenic, are the aardgeese, Ardencerinae, now comprising a distinct suborder within the Dromaeocerina. Originating from a lineage of flightless, running herbivores, they are mainly a group of large, herbivorous to omnivorous canaries, which still retain vestigial barbed wings despite many generations out of the air, with proportionately long legs and necks, and large stomachs able to ferment plant matter efficiently. They all exhibit large cropping bills equipped with tiny serrations for trimming grass, and tough brows and rough and flexible tongues, which can be scraped against the roof of the bill to crudely break up mouthfuls of coarse vegetation before swallowing it, improving their digestion and making them the first birds to have evolved, in some respect, to chew their food. They are running animals, adapted for long-distance travel, often at high speed. Aardgeese have especially well-developed synsacrum bones and an elongated pygostal that together provide support to an elongated portion of the body set behind the legs, providing extra room to accommodate this large gut and subsequently shifting their center of gravity and altering the posture of their legs to compensate, particularly their thighs, which are more vertical than in other birds. Uniquely among birds, many aardgeese can stand close to fully erect, like human beings, with the knees highly flexed and stretched completely downwards. With some primitive exceptions, aardgeese exhibit a unique variation of plumage. With the exception of the wings and the rump, the development of advanced adult feathering no longer occurs in most members of the lineage, and instead, the animals retain only their soft, single-stranded down feathers as adults. This plumage is unbarbed and likely very similar to the inferred appearance of the most primitive feathers. As it occurs on the aardgoose, it is extremely dense, each feather follicle almost directly adjacent to another, and no longer grows from tracts in the skin, but sporadically across the skin. Like hair, but in clumps of 3 fibers, each attached at the base. Each 3-tufted feather is extremely thin and grows rapidly. If plucked, it can completely regenerate within a single day. The feathers in the body plumage are individually so small that they use extremely little blood when developing, meaning that they do not cause heavy bleeding if damaged while immature, as large barbed feathers may. Aardgoose plumage is short, soft, and downy, generally just an inch or 2 thick on the trunk of the body, but extremely dense and insulating, and fits more tightly to the body than is expected in a bird, closely following the curvature of the body, similar to fur, rather than masking it in thick feathers. Where adult feathering still emerges on the aardgoose's body, the rump and the wings, and occasionally the crown of the head, it does so from almost vestigial feather tracks, and rises through the thick downy fur that covers the bird's body. The neotenic loss of most adult plumage in most aardgeese seems to have occurred in the common ancestor of most living aardgeese within 10 million years post-establishment. A scarce number of extremely basal surviving representatives of the clade, which split before this time, still develop adult plumage over their bodies. Aardgeese by this time occur on every major continent, with a total diversity topping more than 450 species. Aardgeese have come to all but completely stake claim on megafaunal grazing and browsing niches as a result of their efficient grazing adaptations, precocial offspring which can almost run from birth, and cursorial nature that allowed their earliest representatives to escape early predators as the skyks, Tyrannocerinae, that have since hunted much less adaptable animals as the enormous, defenseless womblers to complete extinction. The smallest aardgeese of the Tempucene are not much larger than a rooster, while the largest representatives may stand more than 12 feet tall at the head and weigh very near to 1,000 pounds, making them the most diverse in size of all canaries of their time. The ovovivians, the nearly live-bearing bird. The most successful new branch of aardgeese 25 million years post-establishment is the Ovovivavia, a suborder endemic to the eastern landmass of the Moon, from Striata through Walteria and down as far as Carré and the southern pole, but in particular the temperate seasonal environments. The many varied members of this clade have all evolved towards the shortest external incubation period of any bird, and surely the shortest that is physically possible. Most eggs hatch within minutes of being laid by the female. This remarkable fact, almost unbelievable at first, comes as a direct result of the ovovivians having developed the most advanced reproductive process so far evolved in known archosaurs. Instead of laying clutches of multiple eggs and then incubating them for a prolonged period on the ground, where countless predators are always eager to snatch a meal, ovovivians produce only one single egg, which is retained in the oviduct until it is ready to be laid, effectively being the only birds which truly become pregnant. This manner of reproduction allows an egg which would be too large for the mother to incubate properly outside her body, and subsequently aardgoose eggs are truly enormous. In the smallest species, they may weigh as much as 1/6 that of the mother, and while proportionately smaller in larger species, a 200-pound aardgoose can easily produce a 17-pound egg, and that of a truly giant species may weigh as much as 30 pounds, nearly a third again larger than an elephant bird's egg, the largest known on Earth. The egg develops in a uterus-like swelling in the reproductive tract toward the hind end of the animal, behind its legs, and pressing near to the stomach, making full use of the elongated body unique to the aardgoose family, which provides not only room for the oversized stomach, but also the enormous egg as it incubates. Pseudo-ovoviviparity. How does it work? The term ovovivian is a slight misnomer. These aardgeese are not truly live-bearing, for their eggs hatch externally. However, They are likely as close as a fundamentally modern bird can conceivably evolve towards true ovoviviparity. In most species, the entire incubation is done internally. While other birds produce many eggs, laying one at a time until a whole clutch is complete, the mother aardgeese of this clade stop at a single egg and retain it within their body for a prolonged amount of time. The egg takes up almost the entire oviduct, which prohibits clutches of more than this single embryo within a season, and in the event 2 eggs are fertilized, the second is given priority and the first voided, laid, and abandoned. The successor egg, however, may then remain in the mother's body for more than 50 days before itself being laid. In the very largest of aardgeese, as long as 75 days, and is incubated through its most tender days internally at the perfect temperature for its development, the perfect natural body temperature of its species. Among other benefits, this permits the mother to reproduce much earlier in the season in temperate climates than other birds, and gives her a strong competitive edge in cold regions where eggs incubated on the ground would freeze. Protected inside her body by its relatively large size and subsequent durability compared to a smaller egg, it is cradled by the mother's abdomen throughout its entire incubation. The muscles of the mother's reproductive tract exert upon the egg at all times a gentle, even level of pressure that prevents any one weak spot from the eggshell from succumbing to stress and cracking as the mother goes about her business. But this only works because the aardgoose's egg is so immense. Much smaller, and the shell would be too weak to withstand the pressures it would find itself in as the mother runs and moves. The aardgoose's reproductive strategy is extremely ingenious but limited. It is truly only possible in a relatively large and flightless bird, or perhaps one extremely sedentary while carrying her egg. However, this would defeat the purpose of the adaptation, which is to free the mother from having to sit and expose herself and her young while incubating. The egg receives the regular gas exchange it requires in the reproductive canal through the periodic reflexive contraction and expansion of the abdominal muscles as they press against the egg with each of the mother's breaths, keeping it stable and additionally ventilating the pseudo-womb with each contraction. Each inhalation of the mother causes the muscles to momentarily pull away from the egg, allowing it to rotate slightly to keep the embryo from sticking to one side of the eggshell, and pulling in a pulse of fresh air through the cloaca, which is quickly warmed inside the relatively hot interior of the mother's body. In effect, her reproductive tract becomes a second lung of sorts during her pregnancy, not for herself, but for her offspring. Hatching the young. The mother aardgoose relies on auditory cues from her unborn offspring to determine when is the best time to lay the enormous egg, neither so soon that it will require further incubation out of the body, which the mother has usually lost any instinct to do, or so late that it might rupture internally and fill her body with lacerating chunks of eggshell, infecting and likely killing her. Between 45 and 75 days after the egg is formed in the reproductive tract, longer in larger species and less in the smaller, the embryo inside begins to chirp. At first, the calling is faint, but it grows stronger by the day until it is almost constant, nearly frantic. When the embryo within the egg is nearing hatching, typically 3 to 5 days after peeping begins, the sound is significantly loud that the mother can hear it within her own body cavity. The calls of her offspring initiate a rapid flood of her maternal hormones, which serve not only to alter her behavior in a motherly way, but to relax the muscles in her reproductive tract and release the egg. From here, she knows instinctively that she has a job to do. The ardgoose's eggshell, in its evolutionary process, has become so thick in order to stay intact inside the mother's body that the infant cannot usually hatch without the assistance of its mother carefully pipping the egg to assist it. The hen excitedly nestles over the egg, surrounding it in the long, soft plumage of her degraded wings, and gingerly cracks the air pocket in the top of it to free her baby. She works diligently, but with extreme care, to break the eggshell and let the infant out into the world, pulling the shell apart with her flexible tongue and strong bill until the chick is loose and finally able to see the mother it has called for so long. A new mother sits tightly over her new baby, keeping it warm and sheltered and grooming its plumage dry in a distinctively un-bird-like manner, more like a mammal would be expected to do, before giving it its first meal. A frothy, highly nutritious crop secretion similar in consistency to cow's milk. Unlike its ancestors, it will have all but used up its egg yolk in the days before hatching. As the infant does not have to exert itself in this process, however, like most birds do, it finds energy and begins to stand and walk around extremely quickly, often within an hour. At birth, the chick is extremely well developed, large and alert, and can run and follow its mother and herd that same day, unlike the highly dependent and vulnerable young of earlier ancestors. The mother ardgoose is an exceptionally devoted parent to her young and to others' young. Living in herds, mothers will readily tend to any young which beg for food, not only their own, and all serve to protect each other's chicks from danger, though it doesn't seem this is because they confuse their young with those of other females. For specific mother-offspring bonds are very strong, and mothers will strongly favor their own offspring when resources are limited. Rather, it simply seems to be an instinct to protect all of the young around when conditions are sufficient for everyone. As long as resources allow, when everyone chips in, success is improved for all. A young ardgoose is fed on a richly nutritive crop milk for a number of months after its birth, before fully weaning around 1 year of age, but it begins to feed itself a little by 2 or 3 months of age. It is completely independent by its first birthday. If the offspring dies in its shell, or if it was infertile to begin with, a female aardgoose will eventually void the egg within 2 weeks of the anticipated incubation time, knowing instinctively that it is proven inviable. Without chirping from within, she will ignore the egg as she would an accidental second offspring at the beginning of her breeding cycle, leaving it for the scavengers. In such an event, the hen has wasted time carrying the lifeless egg, but has not expended significant resources in doing so beyond those used to produce the egg in the first place itself over a month ago, and can become impregnated again almost immediately, hopefully more successfully. Infertile pregnancies are relatively common in first-time mothers, and become less so with maturity. Evolution. The first ovovivian is thought to have evolved roughly 8 million years ago, from an ancestor which gradually delayed laying further and further along in order to protect the offspring from early predators and get an edge on competition in cold climates. Originally, external incubation would be delayed only for a few days and then would commence normally, but through the process of natural selection, those individuals which proved able to do so for longer and longer periods and adapted ways to make the process work more efficiently found greater success than their competitors. These adaptations include not only the gradual thickening of the eggshell to resist internal breakage and the subsequently necessary instinct to assist in hatching their own offspring, but the advanced state of the muscles within the bird's body itself, which has become sufficiently mobile to manipulate the egg internally and cradle it without either losing it and laying it prematurely or getting it stuck in place, seemingly in response to the habit of the female intentionally delaying laying for short periods of time when conditions may not have been favorable. Other aardgeese can occasionally do this already, even postponing the development of further eggs in the clutch to avoid a waste of energy if conditions are not safe to lay eggs, suggesting it's probable that the original evolution of the modern condition originated in this way. Gradually, it became the norm to abort all but the first egg in a clutch and to retain it for a very long time before laying it, the muscles in the oviduct becoming stronger and better able to support it safely. The instinctive pushing reflex of a female bird with an egg in the oviduct remained, now becoming the driving force for the oxygenation of the oviduct to allow the egg to breathe. The process would quickly void the egg were it not for the support of additional muscles further towards the cloaca, which constrict the tract to keep the egg in place. These muscles contract just tight enough to keep the egg from sliding too far southwards and leaving the body during incubation, letting the egg finally slide past only after the mother voluntarily relaxes them when the egg is ready to hatch. Once the cloacal muscles retract, the breathing movements quickly become pushing movements and release the egg from the oviduct and into the world in the usual manner. Social behavior and the benefits of pseudo-ovoviviparity. Ovovivian aardgeese are interestingly not monogamous like most of their near relatives. Instead, single males guard harems of females and fight aggressively between themselves for mating rights. The males are much larger than the females and highly ornamented with bold coloration and bill casques, while females are plain. More basal cursoserinans notably are still monogamous, but are also gender dimorphic. In these species, males use their brawn to defend and care for their smaller, camouflaged partners whilst they incubate their clutches of eggs. The male in these species does not sit on the eggs, but feeds the female while she does, allowing her to remain on them for the entire long incubation period. And he drives off predators that threaten her in her vulnerable position. When the chicks hatch, the male and female both feed the young crop milk. Both aardgoose clades have precocial offspring, but the ovovivanian chick is larger and stronger at birth, as it does not have to fight a race against time to develop and hatch in the dangerous world outside its mother's body. The ovovivanian aardgoose hatches only a single chick at once, while others may rear as many as 6, but its young are born larger and cared for longer. While the basal aardgoose will likely lose as many as half of its young before they are mature, the single chick has a higher rate of survival as a result of the extra safety net its mother's derived reproductive behavior. The basal aardgoose must also wait to nest until the climate is right, putting her at a disadvantage to those not too uncommon springs when the weather takes a long time to warm. Able to start as much as a month earlier, the ovovivanian female can be onto her second egnancy by the time her competitor has laid her first clutch. She can continually become pregnant and hatch offspring as long as the weather allows, readily producing 3 clutches in a good summer. By autumn, she may lead 3 chicks of different ages all at once, which will all remain with her until the following spring, when they are all independent and the weather is mild. By then, food is abundant again for the youngsters as they set out on their own in the herd. Siblings will remain together for most of their second season, the oldest often taking over partial mothering duties for the youngest. The younger siblings may still occasionally be fed small feedings of crop milk by their older brothers and sisters until they are close to 1 year old. At this time, as they reach their own adolescence, their older siblings have reached full sexual maturity and move on to start their own families, already having some advanced practice in childcare. The youngest birds, born late in their first year, will likely not reproduce their second season, but will wait until the following spring when they are approaching 3 years of age. with a diversity broadly equivalent to all of Earth's ungulates, and filling an equivalent series of niches, adaptable body plans, and revolutionary evolutionary advancements. Aardgeese by the Middle Tempucenic already hold excellent prospects in the coming millennia upon the true world of birds. The white-browed viva, Servanser, is a mid-sized, browsing representative of the ovovivian clade. The most widespread member of the Servanser genus, the deer goose group. It is native to the open woodlands and tall grass prairies across most of Striata in the Middle Tempucenic era, 25 million years post-establishment. Aardgeese of these genus, which comprises about 20 species, are mostly specialized as browsers. They are less sexually dimorphic than some other genera, particularly those which live on the open plains, and the males of this genus are often most only slightly larger and more colored than their female counterparts. Vivas, like some other ovovivians, exhibit large, keratin-covered bone spurs on their wrists. These are used by the hen in defense and the male in intraspecific combat. These are not to be confused with true claws, which all Serina birds, as passerines, ancestrally lost. Pictured is a day-old chick alongside an expectant mother and adult male. The swollen oviduct of the hen is clearly visible through her feathers as she carries her 15-pound egg. As an ovovivian aardgoose can carry only a single offspring per breeding cycle, by the Middle Tempucenic, the live-bearing fishes have diversified enormously. From tiny colonists have radiated an enormous number of new lineages. Guppies gave rise to dozens of distinct freshwater lineages, ranging from small, minnow-like shoaling species to truck-sized riverine herbivores that may consume more than 400 pounds of green food in a single day, and give birth to as many as 100,000 free-swimming larval offspring in one litter. They give no parental care, and even though they do not lay eggs, they still rely entirely on chance to reproduce, and play the numbers game in hopes that one or two of their tiny infants will survive to maturity. For they contend with an onslaught of countless, fierce new predators. From the Pleiades and swordtails have arisen the sword sharks, lively shark-like carnivores with frightening, toothy maws that teem across all of the ocean's salt waters. with highly elongated tail swords in both sexes. These fast-moving oceanic fishes use these to sweep through shoals of fish, stunning them, and then turning around to gobble up the casualties. With complex social behavior, sword sharks are cooperative hunters, teaming up to trap fish in bait balls with nowhere to escape, making feeding easier. To facilitate communication between individuals, they can rapidly fire up or dull down a series of bold spots on their sides, which reflect light and make their positions clear to their fellows. These fish have also evolved a placental tie, with which they nourish their young in the womb, thereby giving birth to fewer but larger offspring, each better suited to survive on its own after birth. Adults move towards shore, giving birth in sheltered, floating algae thickets, where the young are safer than the open sea. The opaline sword shark, Encephalophocodex opalorica, is an 8-foot-long predator of the open Serina seas. A typical member of its grouping, these fish hang in loose packs and work together to attack shoals of smaller fish, thrashing them with their tails to stun them. On warm, tropical mudflats, the bizarre mudwickets, small but oddly shaped creatures with squat, toad-like bodies, bulbous eyes, huge mouths, and flattened bellies, hop from the tide and onto the shore to hunt seaside insects and crustaceans with needle-like teeth and oversized, crunching jaws. Only very distant relatives of the sword whales, these fish descended not from the swordtails but the guppies, and their evolutionary history has been very different as well. They have largely left the sea and crawl about on the sand with webbed, hand-like pectoral fins and periodic thrusts of short tails, which function like a spring to catapult them to safety in times of danger, and survive above the water by absorbing atmospheric oxygen through a highly vascularized plate on the roof of the mouth, and to a lesser extent through their skin, in a manner similar to amphibians. So long as these structures remain moist, they allow the fish to survive indefinitely out of the water. Mudwickets are terrestrial from birth, able to breathe air from infancy, and will drown if trapped for a prolonged period in deep water. Their gills diminished and their swim bladders vestigial, they can no longer swim. Instead of retreating to the water when danger threatens, they rush to complex, communal burrows just below the high tide line, which may extend 5 feet below the ground and consist of a series of flooded chambers. Every chamber in a burrow holds a large air pocket, which can only be kept fresh and oxygenated through strenuous, repeated trips back and forth to the surface at every low tide. The fish bringing up a mouthful of depleted air and then back down a bubble of new, clean air with each descent to fill its reserves. These air pockets keep the fish alive when high tide returns and covers the burrow system in as much as 4 feet of water. The mudwicket's burrows may be used as many as 200 fish at any one time and can become quite complex. Different chambers are utilized for different purposes. The deepest chambers are for the storage of excess food, which lasts longest in relatively low oxygen, cooler conditions, while the warmest, most oxygenated, shallow chambers near the surface are used as nurseries in which they give birth. The infants are large and well developed when they leave the mother's body, but remain underground for a considerable time before ever leaving to hunt on their own, being fed by the colony's adults. This appears to be an unintentional effort, the mudwicket having a tendency to drag its prey underground before feeding, primarily to prevent it being stolen by a competitor or attracting a predator, thus allowing the young to gather around and feed on the scraps. The young mudwickets will remain underground while growing fat on their parents' scraps for as many as 30 days before they emerge from the burrow for the first time to hunt on their own and begin to pull their weight in maintaining the burrow. Individual colonies of mudwickets are male-dominated, and these males, which are large and brightly ornamented, are fiercely territorial toward their same-sex neighbors. But as a colony grows, a single male cannot possibly mate with as many females as he might control, giving males on the outskirts of the colony without harems their own chance to mate when the females come above ground to feed. Young males are driven from the colony at maturity, the lucky few to survive long enough to start a new burrow system, beginning their own new harems and colonies, the rest surviving in only small shelter burrows and relying on sneak mating to mate with other males' unguarded females to spread their genes. When a predatory bird threatens, every fish on the shore will vanish in an instant into the sand and seal the entrances of their burrows with a plug of mud until they are certain the threat has vanished. It is not unusual for a colony to remain entirely underground for an entire day after a fright, feeding on the invertebrates they have amassed in the lower chambers of their burrow system until they can be certain the danger has gone. Most of a mudwicket's diet consists of insects, hermit crabs, and other arthropods, along with the occasional small fish trapped within a tide pool, though large species may occasionally ambush small birds. One genus specializes in bivalves, making regular forays down steep rocks into deep tide pools to pull them from submerged stones, then crushing the shells with enormous, squared-off teeth to get at the meat. Conversely, another has evolved to forage quite far up the beach and away from the surf, having abandoned colonial existence for small and solitary burrows near the tree line at the end of the beach, which just tap the underground water table. One particularly promising family of mudwicket has, in fact, left the seaside environment completely and moved far inland, following rivers and building its burrows in the muddy banks of freshwater ponds and streams. Here they prey on crayfish and aquatic insects, as well as land invertebrates, such as crickets and snails, that they may forage for as far as 50 meters from the water, crawling through damp leaf litter and even scaling small logs and fallen branches in the process. In rainy conditions, members of this group may travel over a mile inland to reach isolated sources of water, digging into damp soil or hiding under logs to keep damp in between open pools of water. Most solitary inland species are colored cryptically, but a small number are extremely vibrant and impossible to miss in shades of blue, red, and yellow, advertising deadly toxicity in the mucus of their skin that they engineer from their diets, which incorporate a significant amount of poisonous ants. The seven-spotted mudwicket, Rhinocephalus septilochus, is a plump, colonial species of mudwicket that thrives along the seashores in tidal estuaries of the Sierran subcontinent, where it dwells in large and complex burrow systems just below the high tide line. In most mudwickets, males are larger and brighter than females, but females too, in some species, can carry some bright colors, and a female carrying a litter of offspring can become quite swollen in the days before pregnancy, rivaling the weight of her mate. Most species, even at their extremes, are hardly what could be considered large, except on a relative scale, however. The seven-spotted mudwicket is an average 6.5 centimeters in length and just 1 to 2 ounces in weight. Though a descendant of the extravagant guppy fish, their tails today, short and stocky, function for little more than an occasional boost of propulsion to dart down a burrow to safety. The grandest guppy, meet the Gemnus. This is a guest entry conceptualized by Joseph Cowley, who commissioned the project author to illustrate this species to flesh out the project. His writing below has been supplemented by the project author for clarity. In the mid to late Hypostacene, the freshwater ecosystems of Serina have stabilized and diversified into rich environments full of diverse plant and animal life. Freshwater habitats presented excellent opportunities for speciation due to the constantly changing environmental conditions as rivers twisted and turned, connected and disconnected from ponds and lakes, and moved toward the sea. As with all life introduced to Serina, the evolutionary vacuum also had profound effects on the live-bearing fish that were seeded in Serina's waters, which diversified dramatically to fill the niches of an empty ecosystem. From the late Hypostacene to the early Tempucene, many lineages of guppies evolved to exploit all the vegetation that formed the basis of these new aquatic food chains. Many new families evolved that were either entirely herbivorous or whose families had representatives that fed predominantly on plant life. In the tropics, this explosion in herbivore diversity can be most plainly seen. Here, one can find fishes straining the surface for tiny leaves of water lily-like floating clovers, others that scrape low-lying algae off rocks, filter feeders that strain for the smallest of phytoplankton with gill rakers, bottom-feeding forms which scour the mud on the bottom for edible detritus, and finally leaf croppers who browse the larger macroalgae, elodia, and aquatic grasses with blunt, cutting teeth. Even species that fed on similar plant or algae species could avoid competition with each other by feeding at different times of the day, or in the case of large, upright aquatic plants, could have different species exploiting them at different depths. When these herbivorous fishes first evolved, a veritable bonanza was available to them. Snails and crayfish, among other invertebrates, fed on Serina's plant life since the beginning of Serina's history, but they were not especially mobile. Fish, meanwhile, were able to move much further into new ranges in a single generation. They could, in most instances, also grow larger, allowing them to become the primary herbivores in aquatic environments within just a few million years. Though Serina had several entirely aquatic plants introduced at its start, terrestrial species quickly also adapted to survive and even thrive in riparian environments and eventually in fully submerged habitats. Grasses were among the first, producing several aquatic lineages in the first 10 million years of evolution on Serina. With sturdy leaves protected from many grazers with silica particles in their tissues, grasses were tough to consume. Some guppies grew larger to consume them. They evolved pharyngognathy. This is when the left and right pharyngeal tooth-bearing bones in the jaw fuse together to form a more sturdy jaw structure able to chew coarse plants. Various muscles strengthened around these throat jaws to enable a wide variety of movements of both the upper and lower jaws and provide a wide cutting bite. Wide, cusped teeth evolved to process aquatic grasses, which they were continuously replaced as the silica found within them wore them down, while symbiotic bacteria in stomachs and guts made breaking down cellulose and other formerly indigestible elements of this diet possible. As happens in any evolutionary race between predator and prey, plants adapted in turn ways to reduce the damage inflicted by these herbivore fishes. Some plants and algae simply grew at enormous rates, able to recover and endure even heavy grazing simply through rapid proliferation. The cell walls of some descendants of Elodia became composed of ever more complex polysaccharides that made extracting energy difficult. Algae developed mineralized, coral-like forms as protection from the algal scrapers. Though life in water usually means plants are free from the need to have sturdy supporting stems, Heavy grazing encouraged the development of more rigid, even woody, stems to make aquatic plants resistant to attacks by nibbling fish, while hooks, thorns, and spines were also deployed on a variety of aquatic angiosperms, anything to make feeding on them more difficult. By the Tempucene, many water plants have adopted strange and bush-like growth forms, creating dense thickets of woody stems underwater, which were difficult for most fishes to consume. Aquatic grasses, meanwhile, spread wildly with long, well-defended silica-infused leaves, sharp enough to cut unwary swimmers by. Never had Earth ever known such a viciously defensive underwater ecology, because never had Earth provided the environmental conditions to allow for the evolution of large numbers of huge, plant-eating freshwater fish. But not even the most vicious defenses can dissuade the largest and most specialized of these grazing fishes evolution could produce. Originating in the tropical rivers of northern Canary, one group of guppy descendants, known as gymnuses, evolved as veritable living lawnmowers, able to get past even the most vicious plant defenses. Bulky herbivores with well-developed pharyngeal jaws for slicing and grinding up the toughest plant material. Their jaws are full of large, cusped teeth, while their intestines are incredibly long, often 15 to 20 times that of the body length. These adaptations together enable them not only to extract as much nutrients from some of the most well-protected plant life around, but to specialize upon it. Because they favor the harshest plant diets, they have little to no competition and can grow to quite large sizes, with the smallest being no less than 10 feet long. As far as guppy clades go, they are not the most diverse by any means. Just 12 species exist worldwide, but their large size and continuous browsing on vegetation makes them have significant impacts on the ecosystems they inhabit. By the middle of the Tempucene, one particular species of gymnus has evolved to grow to truly extraordinary dimensions, surpassing any freshwater fish of modern Earth. Native to the deep, vegetated rivers throughout the continent of Canary, it is notable for its opportunistic grazing over land when seasonal rainfall causes the rivers to overflow their banks, at which time the gymnus takes advantage of the situation and grazes these submerged grasslands much like an underwater cow. The giant gymnus can grow just over 30 feet in length and is truly an awe-inspiring sight to behold. Weighing over 3 tons, these truck-sized fish are true titans of the river. They are endless nomads, traveling up and down the waterways that they call home. They feed predominantly on a particularly vicious-looking plant, spike-leaf waterweed, a spreading, fast-growing aquatic grass with knife-like leaves edged in barbs of silica deposits, which it evolved in response to millions of years of grazing pressure by smaller fishes. When left to themselves, these plants quickly form impenetrable thickets along the riverbeds and are quick-growing, covering the water column from bottom to surface. They shelter large amounts of small fish and invertebrates when present in moderation, but if left entirely undisturbed, colonies of this plant accumulate sediment in their spines, causing rivers to gradually become clogged with dirt, shallow and muddy, eventually becoming shallow marshlands where little plant life but the spike leaf can survive. Once the river fills with sediment and becomes too shallow for the few aquatic species that can eat it to reach it, virtually no terrestrial grazers exist adapted to consume it, and huge stretches of wetland can become clogged with it to the exclusion of most other life. Fortunately for the health of the ecosystem, gymnoses have evolved to browse the waterweed heavily, consuming it preferentially during the drier seasons, when the rivers are lower and the grasslands above dry out, and preventing it from congesting the rivers and dominating the riparian landscape. They have large, heavy scales for protection against the spines covering their face, present even on the lips. Their teeth are multi-cusped and have additional serrations on each cusp to maximize the surface available to chew. Due to the intramandibular joint that it has inherited from its guppy ancestors, it can gape wide and has increased bite force, allowing it to take huge bites out of a thicket of these well-armed plants. While the plant is being sliced up, the insides of its mouth produce copious mucus to protect it from the spines piercing its mouth. It is the mighty pharyngeal jaw with rows of elongated, molar-like teeth with a ridged surface used for grinding the plant into a pulp that can then be swallowed. Able to consume more than 400 pounds of plant matter daily, even a small population of giant gymnoses serve well to limit the growth of the spike leaf and maintain a healthy balance of microhabitats in the river. Clearings formed by the grazers allow water to flow freely, preventing sediment from building up, while remnant patches of the plant proliferate in shallow bends and eddies that the largest grazing fishes cannot reach, sheltering fry and invertebrates from their predators. Giant gymnoses are very long-lived. They reach sexual maturity at 15 years of age and can live as long as 120. And though growth slows after the first 20 years, it never entirely stops. Traveling up and down thousands of miles of rivers their entire lives, giant gymnoses are solitary but not territorial. Mating is a sporadic occurrence which can occur at any time. When two of these giants encounter each other, they will line up beside each other. The sexes are identical, save for the gonopodium of the male, so they each inspect the anal fin of the other. If this fin is the same shape as theirs, then they will continue on their path. But if the anal fin is a different shape, then mating will commence. There is no elaborate courtship as for the most part, as adult giant gymnoses are rare, and to even encounter another one is a good indicator that that individual has lived long and has good genes for survival. If multiple males meet, they do not fight. Both will mate a female in turn without aggression. Several weeks after mating, a female gives birth to an incredible 100,000 or so young, which are shockingly small in comparison to herself, barely a centimeter in length. This shows very clearly that the Gymnus lineage has evolved enormous adult sizes quickly and without any modifications to the ancestral guppy's manner of reproduction, where small eggs hatch internally and are then birthed and left to their own devices. The young experience overwhelming mortality in their first several years, and less than one brood can be expected just through its first 2 years. Possibly as few as only one individual in every 5 million born will manage to reach its maximum size. The young hide in the weeds like the fry of other live-bearers and initially eat biofilm, algae, and the larvae of insects. There are numerous predators ranging from bass-like group fishes to small mantis-like fishing crayfish waiting for their chance to strike. And some gymnus live for just seconds if their mothers do not take sufficient effort to shelter in the weeds when giving birth. If she does not, other fishes will swim right up to the oblivious birthing mother, waiting to be the first in line to catch the fry as soon as they emerge. When the survivors of the initial gauntlet reach a length of 4 inches, their jaw changes position from terminal to ventral, enabling them to graze algae off the leaves of large water plants. Now they are a little safer as they are faster and more alert, and can zip to shelter if danger approaches. When they reach a foot in length, their guts become increasingly well developed, and their mouth and throat teeth become more suiting for nipping off and chewing blades of grass, though it will be some time yet before they can consume the spike-leaf plants the adults primarily eat. At this age, the juveniles will begin to venture into flooded meadows and crop the submerged land grasses. And while they have outgrown some enemies, many large predator fishes will still take them. By 5 years of age, however, the ever smaller pool of survivors will have grown to a length of 10 feet, outgrown virtually all enemies, and begun feeding on spike-leaf plants, effectively adults. They are now big enough that little can bother them, and they start to become solitary. Their sharply forked caudal fin becomes more rounded for their more lethargic way of life. From here, the only further changes are gradually increasing size. For decades they grow, albeit slowly. The bigger they become, the better they can digest their coarse diet. But eventually, in a cruel twist of fate, they all outgrow their rivers. A dry season might bring the end. The water will, if only temporarily, recede just enough to leave the very largest gymnoses beached, unable to free themselves, and eventually to starve or suffocate. When a gymnos dies, it serves as a great feast for a multitude of scavengers that can last for weeks, much like a whale fall in the deep sea on Earth. "25 million years post-establishment, the mutualistic relationship that has developed between certain genera of leafcutter ants and several species of bamboo has produced a radiation of wildly successful new species that exist in symbiosis with one another. By the end of the Hypostacene, a distinct example of mutualism had already begun to spread across the world's forest ecosystems, where colonies of ants and bamboo plants had begun to adapt toward each other's benefit. The ants protected their host plant, known as a myrmecophyte, literally ant plant, in return for a safe and secure place to call home, driving off other insects and keeping their home plant safe from threats. In the following 10 million years, this process has continued to an even greater extent. A new genus of ants has become obligatorily tied to a newly evolved radiation of bamboo plants that no longer spread significantly by rhizomes into colonies, but instead grow single, tall trunks, which grow a radiation of secondary branches at every leaf node, eventually developing a pyramidal shape reminiscent of a pine tree with only a single leading shoot. This single tree lasts several years before flowering magnificently at its upper growing stem but a single time, producing seed and then dying. These single-stemmed, tree-like bamboos grow more slowly than their clumping relatives and most other tree-like plants, which would normally put them at a distinct disadvantage in a high competitive world. But these plants, have a secret weapon. They grow large and extremely thick knots near its base and throughout its root system, in which the symbionts dwell. The knots are hollow, providing a perfect environment for the leafcutter ants to cultivate their fungal gardens, relatively safe from predators as well as the weather. No longer needing to dig their own burrows, they cultivate their gardens in pre-built beds, leaving them more time for other occupations, such as defending the host tree from all threats, from tiny beetles to giant browsing birds. Any creature which attempts to feed on the host plant in which the ant lives is mobbed en masse and bitten with giant mandibles and stinging bites. Additionally, however, simple defense, already having been practiced by many species for several million years, has in a few new symbiotic relationships becomes active offense. As previously described, leafcutter ants have existed in symbiosis with bamboo for more than 10 million years by the Middle Tempucene. Many species of ant still behave similarly to their ancestors, feeding on their neighbors and defending their hosts by attacking hungry herbivores. Even other colonies of their own species on neighboring plants. There exist constant battles waged by the bamboo with their own insect armies that each exhibit specific castes adapted to either attack threatening animals or to clip vegetation. The monovitus bamboo, however, does not grow where bamboos historically have. With its single trunk and slower than average growth rate, it has begun to adapt to a drier climate than most of its kind can tolerate. It moves onto the dry uplands where the sunflower trees thrive, storing energy in a strong taproot. The sunflowers are more abundant and grow faster than the bamboo, and exude harmful tannins into the soil in attempt to stunt its growth and crowd out the competition. But the monovitus has a solution. Its own leaves are thin, hard, and succulent, almost needle-like to survive in drier environments, and with bitter alkaloids, they are highly unpalatable to the particular genus of ants adapted to live within it. Even if several trees grow near each other, their ants do not battle. Instead of foraging from their own host species, the logger ants, with shearing mandibles for pruning plants, cooperate to search out more succulent foliage, and nothing is more succulent than the soft, broad leaves of the sunflower trees. As the secondary branches of the bamboo tree spread out in a whirl in all directions around the trunk, they regularly come into contact with surrounding sunflower trees that the ants then feed from, cropping the green leaves and taking them down to their burrows in the bamboo's roots to feed their fungus gardens. Unlike other bamboo, the sunflower trees have not adopted their own armies of protective ants and have no defense against such a systematic attack. All around the tree, the ants obliterate the surrounding vegetation, completely defoliating their host tree's competitors, cutting off their flowers before they bloom, and eventually killing them. Occasionally, a brush fire burns away all of the food around the tree, sending the dry stalks of the sunflowers up in smoke. But the monovinus survives by merit of its hard, dense wood. After a fire, its thin leaves are quick to regrow. In the intermediate period, where its ant colony has nothing to forage, they turn to feeding on the nutrient-rich tissues of the host tree's root nodules, sufficiently nutritious to sustain them until their preferred food regrows around their host. Within approximately 10 years, a colony has often cleared a circular space of more than 10 meters around, or the approximate spread of its host's branches that now fill the empty space lushly and enjoy a bright spot in the sun. By this time, however, the squat, sprawling tree that now reaches perhaps 5 meters in height begins to stop growing. Its ant population, having ground up all of its competition into a fine compost and deposited it at its own roots, it now sits on an enormous store of nutrients that it uses to produce a magnificent spike of flowers more than 30 feet above its branches, the blossoms cascading nearly 20 feet around from its topmost point in a splendid display. The show lasts for just 3 months before the flowers, pollinated by the wind, fade and large, hard seed pods take their place. Eventually, the pods burst, revealing hundreds of thousands of fluffy, hair-covered seeds, each equipped with a white wisp of fiber that will carry it on the breeze. The seeds are hard, few birds favor them, and the majority float away on the wind. When the seeds mature and are shed, the bamboo dies, its life's work complete. Within a year, its needles wither, its secondary branches drop to the soil, and eventually only a dry trunk remains, like a monolith surrounded by vacant soil and short grasses. When the tree dies, the ant colony follows. Once their host's branches wither, they are isolated in a veritable desert. They consume the roots that once provided them shelter, but as the tree has since died, they become dry, almost inedible, and when used up, don't regenerate. Eventually, there will be nothing left to sustain the colony, and it will collapse. Just before all is lost, the colony reproduces for the first time. For more than a decade, it has produced workers. An extremely long-lived queen has laid hundreds of millions of eggs in her lifetime, all of them infertile female workers. Now, tired and aged, she produces one last flush of eggs to be nourished by the last of the worker ants. Hormonal changes brought by the shortage of food result in a different crop of offspring this time. A swarm of flying queens and drones, fertile females and males. The winged ants take to the skies in search of a new home, while their elders and their tired mother, without food, slowly go still and die beneath the roots of the great tree that sustained them for so long, their lives, but also their life's purpose, completed. The kings and queens are hardwired to search for a new monovitus tree in which to begin a new colony, but only a very young tree, just a few weeks or months old, will suffice. Any older, and a tree will surely be claimed by an established colony. How possibly do the tiny ants, who have just days to find a new host before they starve, locate such a perfect tree? They use their noses, not for the tree's specific scent, no. This would more than likely lead them to a mature tree already taken. They instead search out the scent of a recent brush fire, charcoal and burned carbon. Fire is relatively rare in most Serina environments, but in the dry forests, it is a relatively common fact of life. Given the rapid growth rate of the sunflower trees, it is only when an entire forest has been cleared by wildfire that the seeds of the monovitus tree stand a chance to establish themselves. Of countless thousands that floated all around the now deceased host tree, by chance one or two will surely have landed upon a patch of ground that would, before too long, be scarred by flame. Only when exposed to the extreme heat of a brush fire will the monovitus tree's seeds germinate. Then, briefly free from competitors, the tree has several weeks to sprout and grow as fast as it can before the sunflower forest begins to sprout again around it. By the time it does, as much as 2 years after its parent tree flowered and began to die, it should be just around the time that the mother tree's colony will have produced its flush of new kings and queens in search of their own new little tree to call home. Dozens of the kings and queens, released from the aged mother tree, all hone in upon the new seedling bamboo tree, often the only one of its rare kind for miles around, fighting over squatting rights. Eventually, only a single pair will take dominance in the first, smallest root node of their new host, but eventually, if another tree is nearby and the two come to grow together, multiple colonies will join together. The little family will begin to breed, the flying male at first leaving the tree to distant greenery to bring back leaves to start a fungus garden before the other plants begin to The Tempucenic era sees continued diversification of avian carnivores. Falconaries, a clade of mostly flying predatory birds falling under the order Falconara, have speciated considerably since the Hypostacene, and now number approximately 450 species spread worldwide. The smallest just an ounce in weight, and the largest approximately the weight and stature of the extinct Haast's eagle. Physiologically, they are extremely convergent to true falcons and kill prey, which can range from insects through aardgeese, with their hooked beaks and or their curved talons. A suborder, the ululava, known as bubbarbs, hunts by night with oversized eyes and particularly wide, frog-like mouths, often swallowing their prey whole. Close relatives are the shrike finches, Pugnax ornithes, a cosmopolitan lineage of adaptable and predatory or omnivorous generalists similar to crows, rooks, and true shrikes that descends from the shriekers. Not as specialized as the true falconaries at active predation, they more readily pilfer nests, hunt insects, and consume carrion. Tyrant serins, Tyrannocerinae, are descendants of the early predators known as skyks, and before them the primitive axebills of the early Hypostacene, which were very similar to the ancestral aardgoose. Though distantly related as Dromaeocerinae, tyrant serins have gone down a polar opposite evolutionary path and have become the largest terrestrial carnivores of the Tempucenic era, with genera present in both the east and the west. They now reach sizes of up to 900 pounds and 13 feet in height, and kill with their giant, sharply hooked bill, which features a razor-sharp cutting tooth on either side to cut through bones and ligaments. Tyrant serins are social, hunting in pairs or large and coordinated packs to bring down the largest of ground birds, particularly the aardgeese. Their offspring are precocial, well feathered in warm down, and able to run at birth. But they cannot hunt for themselves for several months and rely on their parents' kills for their first year of their life. When 6 months old, they begin to shed their down and take on their adult feathers and join in active hunting and assist their parents. But they will then not develop adult coloration for more than a year or be self-sufficient until that time. Tyrant serins are either lifelong monogams or serial ones, picking new partners each season. In pack hunting species, the pack usually consists of an alpha male and female and their offspring, plus young males brought in from other packs, with only the alpha pair reproducing and the other serins assisting in bringing up the young. Nesting is typical for ground birds, with incubation often done right out in the open in a basic scrape in the earth, for the largest tyrant serins have no predators of their own. Tyrant serins engage in social singing, usually by night, which serves to affirm pack bonds and keep distant pack members in contact, similarly to the howls of wolves. Their songs remain complex and varied motifs. Both sexes engage in it, and no two individuals sing identically. Close relatives of the tyrant sirens are the Sesopterinae, the hogbirds. Less predatory than tyrant sirens, they are similar to the common ancestor of both clades, the axebills, and comprise a diverse suborder of omnivores with large and sometimes ornamented bills equally suited to crushing seeds, fruit, and nuts as skulls, flesh, and bones. Pelicanaries, Pelicanarinae, are a lineage of seabird descended from the duck-like dugals of the Hypostacenic. They are all almost completely aquatic and flightless, with large paddle-like wings and reduced webbed hind legs situated far back on the body. All species exhibit a pronounced pouch on the underside of the bill, which is used to hold fish. But several especially large species of this lineage have also adopted a very unique trait. They incubate their own eggs within these pouches, with the male and female taking turns sitting at the surface to guard the egg. The pouch is well vascularized with blood vessels, and the relatively large egg, situated in the back near the throat, stays warm, dry, and oxygenated in this makeshift incubator, while allowing the adults to completely avoid coming to shore to breed, where they risk numerous predators and competitors on crowded beaches. Pelicanarian mouth brooding originates from a long process that began with grebe-like ancestors building crude nests in shallow bays out of floating vegetation. This situation provided an environment with fewer competitors and predators than on shore, but the egg was always at risk of falling into the water. Subsequently, it became more buoyant, with a larger air pocket and a waxy eggshell cuticle less easily permeated by seawater. The adult birds simultaneously evolved to quickly grab and retrieve the egg in their throat pouch if it strayed from the nest in a wave. Eventually, this gave rise to dorsal incubation, in which the nest was done away with entirely, and the egg was incubated on the low, flat back of the adult, covered by the neck plumage and warm skin of the bare throat pouch to keep warm, a practice still used by many pelicanarians today. Eventually from there, true mouth brooding was achieved when the parents simply engulfed the egg in the pouch and kept it there at all times, safe from outside threats. As a result of their recently cut ties to land and terrestrial incubation, mouth-brooding pelicanaries are extremely large seabirds that can no longer walk out of water, some weighing upwards of 3,000 pounds and stretching 25 feet long, counting their necks, which can, in some species, be almost half their total length. They are most often deep divers, pursuing open water fish and crustaceans, but shallow water specialists exist, which feed on mollusks and invertebrates living in the shallow sediment of coastal waters. All species of pelicanary are monogamous, for their reproductive methods rely on cooperation, one partner watching the egg while the other feeds. Sunflower trees. By the Tempucene, bamboo and sunflowers together make up the vast majority of tree-like plants, each forming the foundation of major forest communities. Most bamboo generally thrive where conditions are wet, and sunflowers are more tolerant of drier environments, though there is overlap. With a few notable exceptions, most extant bamboo is primitive, forming enormous clumps that reproduce most efficiently via spreading runners. Serina sunflowers by 25 million years post-establishment, however, have changed dramatically and in often remarkable ways. Wherever rainfall is insufficient for the growth of bamboo thickets, but more than is necessary for prairie grasses, a sunflower forest crops up. A far cry from the barren monoculture ecosystems of a very young Serina, the sunflower forest today is a unique, balanced ecosystem comprising many species and organisms, and one that varies considerably across the world. All are defined, however, by the tall, broad-leaved flowering plants that form their canopies. Gigantic, branching sunflowers that live for many years and build up their branching stalks with cellulose, eventually forming a woody trunk and reaching great heights. Sunflower trees are a polyphyletic grouping descended from many distinct ancestors which have converged on a similar appearance in response to the same environmental condition. For example, tropical and temperate species are unrelated, as are most desert and rainforest species. Indeed, at least 4 sunflower lineages independently developed a tree-like growth habit, surviving for a number of years without dying to the ground, and building upon their old growth year after year. But superficially, they are all very similar, with woody trunks that branch growing upwards into many smaller growing shoots. The leaves are broad, flat, and generally nutritious to herbivores, either hairy, as in the ancestral sunflower, or smooth, depending on the species. All sunflower trees have shorter lifespans than most woody earth trees, between 10 and 20 years, but due to a rapid growth rate, this is fully sufficient to reach sizes of 60 feet tall or greater. Sunflower trees reproduce through seeds that follow often very bright and showy blossoms, sometimes still cheery and yellow, and sometimes quite distinct from their ancestors. They are pollinated by beetles and honey ants, or not too infrequently the wind. These trees having significant and colorless blossoms without noticeable petals. Just like the modern sunflower, the seeds of sunflower trees are extremely nutritious and desirable to birds. In temperate climates, the survival of young birds in their first winter can be completely reliant on the success of the seed crop that year. If the trees don't produce large crops in the autumn, the young are unable to fatten up sufficiently to survive migration and starve. Flocks of millions, and not infrequently billions, of seed-eating songbirds gather when crops are heavy, gathering on the bristly branches so thickly that they hang limply under their combined weight. In the tropics, sunflower trees are equivalent to Earth's figs. There is almost always one fruiting somewhere, always providing a reliable food source to jungle animals no matter the time of year. Since sunflower trees grow rapidly, they are among the first plants to colonize cleared ground after a fire. But individual trees are extremely susceptible to flames and burn up rapidly. Their sap highly flammable, and their lightweight, corky wood extremely combustible. A lengthy wildfire can completely destroy vast tracts of sunflower forest, burning hot enough to completely break down the tree's trunks to ash and cinders, and leaving little more than a field of charcoal in their wake, and is often fueled by the dried leaves, fallen flowers, and dead branches that tend to accumulate under the forest in the dry environments in which they thrive. In just a few months, however, a completely charred forest, which seems hopelessly destroyed, will return to a bright green garden as the trees return in the form of sucker shoots sent up by the tree's roots and seeds buried in the soil. Forests tend to burn down completely at least every other decade and regenerate, meaning few ever truly reach their potential natural lifespans or sizes. But incredible growth rates and maturity offset this. A sunflower tree can easily grow 15 feet tall and then flower abundantly in its first year, a benefit of evolving from an annually growing roadside wildflower, meaning that even the shortest season is usually enough to complete a generation. Wherever a sunflower tree does manage to grow to its full 50 or 60 foot height, however, it is truly a sight to behold. A single tree may arch over with 10,000 blossoms, attracting millions of pollinators in the brief 2 to 3 weeks before it loses its petals and becomes an unexceptional green tree once again for the remainder of the year. Aardgeese browse the nutritious green shoots and leaves extensively. The understory of the sunflower forest is usually a patchwork of smaller shrubs, clover, short fern-like grasses that spread along the shady soil, and periodic clearings where wildflowers grow in dense carpets out from the leaf litter. Among the most successful forest shrubs are the long-lived, thorny derivatives of dandelions that grow several meters above the ground on raised woody stems. They thrive in the shade, but their flowers worship the sun. They periodically send up giant, antennae-like flower stalks through the canopy and into the open air as much as 5 meters above, where ants can reach them to pollinate, and where the seeds can then be taken by the wind and dispersed into distant forest clearings. Though they sprout only where the ground is clear and the sun unobstructed, they do not die out when the trees return and close the canopy like many other pioneer species. Instead, they just slow down a bit, growing over many decades in the shade. Seeing many sunflower trees come and go in their time. When the forest goes up in flame, they die to the ground and regrow quickly from their roots, being all but invincible to most natural phenomena the forest can throw at them. Dandelion bushes are also highly successful desert plants, often forming dense stands on the dry borders between savanna and scrub. But it is the sunflowers which are the dominant tree-like plant in Serina's deserts. Here, multiple genera have come to resemble not trees, but cacti, having convergently evolved fleshy, barrel-shaped trunks to store water, reduced or fully absent leaves, and sharp protective thorns and hairs on their soft tissues to protect against evaporation and the hungering of herbivores. Desert sunflower trees are longer lived than forest species, and some may live for half a century or longer, for fire is infrequent in the true desert. There is rarely enough fuel. Like true cacti, these desert sunflowers produce beautiful and extravagant blossoms during the rainy season. Blossoms which produce large quantities of nectar and attract both insects and pollinating birds. However, as the minimal resources of the desert do not allow for a massive overproduction of seeds to counteract the great number $40 million years have passed now, and life all across Serina is changing fast. Sufficient time has amassed for the birds and other organisms introduced to the little blue moon to be shaped and changed in very drastic ways from their ancestral stock. Perhaps nowhere has it changed more quickly and more remarkably, however, than upon the highly isolated Curon Islands. A literal island within the metaphorical island of Serina itself, this island chain exists in constant flux that continues to showcase some of evolution's strangest solutions to survival. The first of the Curon's distant endemics were already becoming relics of bygone times when last we visited them. Huge and maladapted birds existing at the mercy of carnivorous crabs in a bizarre and gory codependency in an ecosystem lacking in efficient predators. 25 million years since, the island's bird life has undergone an almost complete interchange. The habitable suburbs are now long since extinct, and the crabs that haunted them relegated back into less sinister seaside scavengers, following the arrival of highly competitive new faces from far-off lands, and the rise of a group of new island endemic herbivores, forged through a series of small but accumulative changes into some of the most unusual animals ever to walk the land. In addition to the suburbs, the early Kurin Islands had many more native birds. That is, birds whose canary forebears were introduced to the Kurins directly and which did not evolve on other continents and fly here later. While the suburbs were briefly dominant, growing huge on a diet which nothing else could obtain and limited only by extreme nestling predation, smaller birds eked out their own niche. Early canaries rapidly specialized their diets, and some began feeding on the ground. Not all such species ever grew large, and not all immediately became herbivores. By 5 million years, hence the Kurins was home to a variety of small, omnivorous ground birds with wings too small for flight. Similar to quails, they ate insects, seeds, and small animals, almost anything they found on the forest floor. And unlike suburbs, these birds began evolving more precocial chicks, which could run along with their mothers within just a few days of hatching, giving them an advantage in avoiding threats. Some of these adapted over the next few million years to specialize as insectivores, and among those which did, one branch evolved a very elongated beak to probe worms and other bugs out of their burrows in the mud, where less equipped birds were still unable to access them. By 15 million years hence, the descendants of the canary quail began to resemble canary kiwis. They were nocturnal to avoid enemies and competitors, and so their eyes began to reduce in size, almost as much as their wings. Living beneath the stomping feet of the suburbs, they began to nest in deep, winding underground burrows to avoid predation by hermit crabs, and so evolved longer claws to dig. Over the millennia following, some of the burrowing canary kiwis completely adapted to their nocturnal and semi-fossorial lifestyle. They now foraged by scent, with a strong sense of smell, and by touch. A highly sensitive layer of skin began to extend down the length of the bill, which derived from the softer lip tissue along the sides of the ancestral canary's mouth and nostrils, until only a small, hard nail at the end of the jaws remained of the once large beak. By 25 million years hence, the bill had broadened and become flattened like a shovel to move soil loosened by the claws, while whisker-like bristles had evolved from the feathers on the face, further increasing the tactile sensitivity of the bird as it dug nesting burrows beneath the ground and searched for food in pitch-black forest undergrowth. This lineage, the soft-billed birds, so named for the fleshy cere that covered much of their bills, would go on to have a very long dynasty of descendants. This lineage, the soft-billed birds, so named for the fleshy cere that covered much of their bills, would go on to have a very long dynasty of descendants and be ancestral to several major bird clades, which would last throughout the entire existence of the Kurin Islands, and even long after they are gone. But over the coming eons, the soft-billed birds on the Kurin Islands would experiment with a novel form of locomotion no bird would ever again replicate. They would become tripeds and evolve to use their beaks as a third leg. The Kurin Islands are now a very different place than when we left them before. Grassland has come to dominate this once forested island chain, with jungles largely restricted to steep slopes and low ravines. Yet the climate is not much different than it was back then, and annual rainfall is still high. It is not drought that has reduced the extent of woodland, but active deforestation. The Kurins are now home to huge herds of herbivores, and they have single-handedly transformed this landscape over millions of years simply by grazing. They are hulking, low-slung animals, appearing from above almost as large as cattle, but in fact much shorter from the side, almost comically so. Shaggy feather coats cloak them and largely obscure their underlying forms, making them appear all the more bewildering. Their legs are small but sturdy, just barely lifting their bodies off the ground, and their heads proportionately massive with huge, downward pointed beaks, fleshy along much of the length of the top jaw, but ending in a gigantic, hard-crushing implement. They have no forearms at all to speak of, and they walk by pushing their bulking bodies ahead with their tiny little legs, raising the giant beak and slamming it down ahead of them into the earth, using the great neck muscles powering it to pull the rest of themselves up behind and so advance another meter. These are the snuffalo, the 1,000-pound, beak-walking descendants of the canary kiwi, and it is due to them that the islands have all but lost their forests. The snuffalo is a remarkable animal, an entirely herbivorous descendant of an insectivore. It took advantage of an evolutionary vacuum left after the extinction of the suburbs to grow large and return to the daylit world, but has nonetheless retained many of the adaptations it gained in its past life. Its eyes remain small. It is colorblind and very nearsighted, still relying little on sight to survive. It still finds a way around through touch, feeling vibrations in the earth with its sensitive bill and navigating around its world with huge, half-inch thick whisker plumes that sprout in a radial fashion around its bill. For safety, it seeks the comfort of others, living in great and gregarious herds, limited only by the quantity of food they can find, and they find it in great abundance. The snuffalo travel the islands in their herds, moving almost shoulder to shoulder, slowly but steadily cutting down everything in their wake. To feed, the lumbering creatures rest forward on their upper beaks, which are longer and stronger than their lower, while the lower jaw can then open and close freely, pushing mouthfuls of vegetation and then cutting them against a sharp, clipper-like edge of the upper bill. The tongue is very long and mobile, having once adapted to aid the animal's ancestors in pulling insects out of their burrows. And the snuffalo utilizes this now to roll beakfuls of cut hay up and pull them into the throat to be swallowed. When all the vegetation it can reach while so situated like this, the snuffalo lifts its great bill and takes another step to repeat the process. In feeding in this way, the herds of snuffalo continuously cut down the seedlings of trees, which are not so adapted to quickly recover and grow back from mechanical damage as the grass, and so prevent the forest trees from repopulating their kinds, except upon the most angled and inaccessible slopes that the snuffalo, clumsy and poorly balanced, cannot cross. The snuffalo feeds entirely within 1 meter of the soil, and does not bother adult woody vegetation. Yet over so many millions of years of such pressure against their seedlings, the ancient adult trees die off, leaving fewer and fewer descendants, and accelerating the spread of grassland upon the islands. The snuffalo is thus an ecosystem engineer, actively removing plants that it does not feed on and encouraging the growth of its preferred food, albeit unintentionally. In this image, the snuffalo, Rostrambulus gigas, giant beakwalker, a huge soft-billed bird weighing up to 900 pounds, which walks using its huge bill as an additional weight-bearing limb. The snuffalo's life on the islands is far from idyllic, however, since the arrival of a little bird from some far-off land beyond the sea. Some 12 million years ago, a flock of shriekers, a group of early carnivore canaries, were blown far from their migratory routes by a strong oceanic storm, and through great luck and chance, found themselves on the Kirin Islands. Restricted to a small role in the ecosystem in their native territory on the continents by many larger competitors, these little hunting birds, though fierce predators, fed on little more than insects and the very young chicks of other canaries that had remained relatively primitive since their appearance on the planet more than 30 million years ago. On the Kieran Islands, though, the birds had very few competitors to limit them and food in abundance. Naive island birds not used to predation. The shriekers, once arrived here, quickly adapted and soon gave rise to the shrike finches, a family of fierce bird-hunting predators that ambushed their quarry by waiting motionless from a hidden perch, then swooping down to deliver a killing bite with a strong bill that evolved a sharp notch at its end used to quickly break the neck of its prey. These were the first major bird predators these islands would see. Yet as the snuffalo grew large and indirectly deforested its island habitat, the shrike finches too had to adapt to a less vegetated environment, where ambush was less effective and their prey could more easily see them coming from a distance. The shrike finches now had to outsmart the endemic birds. Their ancestors evolved in highly competitive mainland environments, and so they were already intelligent compared to most island birds, which lived a comparatively blissful life with few threats. It was only a matter of combining their skills to become a devastatingly efficient force. The shrike finches began to socialize and cooperate, becoming pack hunters. A lead member would chase the unwitting prey into a trap, where the rest of the group would jump out and kill it, and the group would share in the spoils. It was a winning strategy, one the native birds would take many generations to adapt to. And this brought another problem. These new predators ultimately killed off several of their prey species entirely before they had a chance. To avoid the same fate, the shrike finches had to innovate again. As they depleted songbird populations, they were left with only larger, flightless birds they could not tackle alone or in the small groups of parents and offspring they have adapted to live in. To stand any chance at hunting and killing the soft-billed birds, many times their own sizes, would require even more cooperation. One species began living in huge clans, multi-generational and not all related. Offspring would stay in their parents' packs for their entire lives and eventually bring in unrelated mates and reproduce themselves in the same cooperative group until these units could number more than 50 individuals. And with this incredible combined power, the shrike finches learned to hunt big game. The butcher raptor. Shrike finches, by working in packs dozens strong, learned that even the biggest bird around was vulnerable to their attacks. One bird alone is weak, be it predator or prey. This is a fact both the snuffalo and its primary enemy, a large shrike finch called the butcher raptor, both understand very well. The butcher raptor is not the largest shrike finch, but it is the most formidable among them. Weighing 8 pounds, it is puny compared to the snuffalo in every possible respect but one: brain power. This predator is cunning and quick-witted, able to formulate plans and change them if need be. The butcheraptor is likely the most intelligent bird on Serina so far. Above, the butcheraptor, Necessitasuntus excogitatorius, inside-out killing thinker, is a small but ruthlessly efficient social predator. Despite its size, about that of a chicken, it is one of the island's major predators, with a regular diet of animals that can be more than 100 times its own weight. The butcheraptor is almost entirely flightless, its wings now too small to carry it more than a few flaps. It no longer needs to fly, specializing in subduing large and also flightless prey species, and it now runs on the ground like a roadrunner. Groups travel in the open, unafraid, knowing their numbers protect them from even other predators, and more importantly, well aware that the snuffalo cannot outrun them. The entire pack, save for a few individuals that remain at a communal nest site to guard the nestlings during the breeding season, join in a hunt together. The snuffalos, exposed with nowhere to hide, know when they are around and become alert. Though the grass is tall and the raptors can easily hide themselves, it can smell their revolting, flesh-eating breath and hear keenly the click of their talons on the pebbled ground and the swishing of the grass stalks as they approach in ghastly hordes. The prey take defensive posture, pushing together until they are smashed up together like stuffed animals in a claw machine, all with their heads held low and pushed down beneath the plumage of their neighbors, and they sit their rumps on the ground. They do this to protect their eyes, nostrils, and cloacas. Any sensitive tissue exposed, the butcheraptors will attack. The snuffalo must rely on their own cooperation to survive, each using the thick feathers and insulating back fat of the others to protect their sensitive regions as the raptors close in. The predators, meanwhile, are calm and attentive throughout, watching the chaos as the prey struggle each toward the middle of the herd for safety. They leap onto the backs of the snuffalos and stride over the herd like a crowd surfer at a rock concert, searching for the easiest target. They chatter constantly to themselves, communicating to coordinate their behavior. One will never act without the other's approval. They prefer to take the young, but will go after any individual that exposes itself to their advances. If no weak links stand out, the predators will antagonize the entire herd. They gang up and begin to bite at the individuals at the perimeter until one turns to face its attackers in rage, aiming to pulverize one with a vicious bite of its heavy bill. Nimbler than the snuffalo, the butcheraptor almost always avoids the clamping jaws at the last second. This is what they were wanting. Instantly, the others of the pack leap at the face of the angered snuffalo and begin to gouge at the eyes and the sensitive skin of the bill with their sharp beaks. This will hopefully have the effect of inducing panic. If the whole herd separates, the butcheraptors will have a chance to catch one of the younger chicks that is sheltered deep in the middle of the group, which will be a much easier kill. If this occurs, then the raptors drop off their first target and mob the easier option. Some individuals stave off the parents, which will try to protect their young, while others work to quickly kill and disable the victim. It does not always work. If the other snuffalos in the herd choose fight over flight and come to the defense of the attacked individual, the pack will often call off the hunt, as they cannot risk being trampled or crushed in the jaws of the others while trying to subdue just one individual. Killing healthy adults is not unknown, but it is difficult. Primarily, it is the very old and unwell snuffalo, shunned from the herd, which they manage. It is a grisly end for such individuals, as the raptors, their beaks too weak to cut through the thick skin, target them through their most sensitive orifices, eating them from the inside out. Above, a pack of butcheraptors have singled out a young snuffalo and begin to target its weak spots. Though each of these predators is only as large as a chicken, through sheer numbers they overwhelm their prey in a literal death by 1,000 cuts. Art by trollmans.deviantart.com. Butcheraptors succeed in about half of their hunts and feed primarily on first-year chicks. Among wild predators, this is a high success rate, but the snuffalo population remains stable because though the butcheraptors are efficient predators, their small size means that one kill can feed a colony for weeks before they must hunt again. Combined with a relatively high reproductive output of their prey species, the snuffalos hatch out broods of up to 10 chicks every year, a process which is also synchronized for safety in numbers. Hey, I'm so glad that you enjoyed this video. I at least hope you did. You managed to watch 3.5 hours of it. So if you really enjoy this Serina project, if you can share it to other people, that would really help this channel grow, and it would help me make more of these possible. I would definitely want to apologize for this last section being a bit impromptu. I'm just putting this together in some spare time in between homework assignments, but I think that the next part of Serina, the Cryocene, I likely will not release for another month or so, as I'm going to need some time to continue doing college work and stuff. I'm going to make sure to let you guys know here on YouTube when my content is going to be coming back out for the Cryocene specifically. But I want to do a couple of other things before I make more Serina audio narrations. Anyways, I thank you again for watching over 3 hours of my content. I really want to give you guys applause for that. And I hope you guys all have a good day, evening, or night.